we really need to attack fraud, puts more money in artists' pockets, but also takes money out of bad actors.
What no one wants to talk about is that the 80% of the fraud we catch is financially motivated fraudsters, organized crime, money launderers, terrorist organizations. These aren't like artists juicing their own numbers up. My point is, if you're a real artist or you're really part of the music industry, you will make substantially more money with fraud removed than with it inserted.
Today, Andrew Batey of BeatDapp and Raso of Tune Global talk about how modern technology is reshaping the music industry. They talk about ensuring fair royalties for artists and tackling fraud at its core. I learned a lot. I'm sure you will too. But, well, guys, we are recording on the podcast, so I'll make an introduction in 1 minute. But Andrew, I've been following a few stories, the last couple of months that most people in the music industry have been following with 10 million fraud, like creating AI music, that kind of stuff. And when I read this news, for me, it seems like, oh, this crazy big thing. But like what you're actually saying is it's a very small part of something much larger. Because if you say 10% of all streams that are fraudulent, is that what you're saying? That's what you're claiming?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, then we have a much bigger story than what most people, including myself, are exposed to. But let's just venture quickly into an introduction. Con and Andrew, thank you so much for being on. We have Tune Global, we have BeatDapp. You guys have both been on the platform before. We'll return to that. We'll continue that talk in just 1 minute. But Con and Andrew, just for the sake of the listeners who haven't heard the other episodes you guys have been on, Con, could you just start doing like 30-second introduction of what Tune Global is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Tune Global provides a technical platform for people wanting to do something in music, and we'll cover a little bit deeper later, but it doesn't matter if it's streaming or if it's music used in gaming or medtech or whatever else. We provide not only the music itself, but a very comprehensive range of tools to enable you to do it successfully. And I think that was the genesis of our partnership with Andrew.
And Andrew, BeatDapp.
Yeah, BeatDapp is the leader in fraud detection for the music industry, specifically on streaming content. So we analyze, we sit with the streaming services underneath their hood. The streaming services are primarily our customer and distributors. And we analyze all kinds of data, like battery life, gyroscope, orientation of phone when you played, everything you've done in-app, pre and post playing a track, what features you used, all kinds of data points. We're looking at, thousands and thousands of data features, and we have 600 plus machine learning models to identify different types of streaming anomalies and, more importantly, manipulation. So we analyze all this and we say, these 3,000 artists are fake. They're not even real. All their streams are fake. Don't pay that out. We take that money and we repay back, where we advise to the streaming platforms, reallocate it all to the real artists in the pool. So, whether an artist knows it or not, every artist made more money last year because we exist. And we're just sort of the ghost in the background, sort of righting all the wrongs,
Con, can you just explain sort of the impact Tune Global has and your positioning in the market and why this particular partnership is quite interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from early on, I would say, and we've been around for about 12 years now, right? So we've been around for a little while. Our journey was out of Australia into Southeast Asia with many services before we sort of went through to Europe, US, and really right across the globe today. Our position has always been, there's actually two things that are really interesting about us. Because we started in some of these unusual markets, there was a strong focus also through our early days on music and artists that were specific to regions and countries. And we know that they're artists that are really struggling today. So certainly for myself, when I started to talk with Andrew, forefront in my mind was really, how do you continue to help these artists and not, decay their revenue opportunities in that process? But if we take a step back just for a moment, we started as a B2B business. We were reasonably successful at being able to provide technology for people in streaming services. A key part of our journey was our early journeys into Indonesia and developing our own direct-to-consumer business in that market. And that really shaped us with understanding not only the technology landscape, but the landscape as a company that's actually a DSP themselves, and what are they trying to drive, what's important to them. And so it really brought us on a tool set to say, okay, so what do we actually have to make available besides just, I'm going to say the basic stuff, or the basic stuff is pretty hard, which is, managing all the rights across different territories, managing reporting, being able to actually access a stream, do all those sort of things. But what about, I want an in-app message, I actually need an attribution platform, I need an advertising platform, I need to be able to operate on TVs as well as phones and cars and everything else. And so we really are the company that takes that whole breadth there. And so it just made absolute sense to say, but we're not offering anything in the where fraud is existent. And I'm going to say I was much probably like the listeners here, where until I started hearing Andrew and being exposed to a lot of the numbers that Andrew will probably share on this podcast, I didn't think the problem was as big as it was. And I also wasn't fully aware of what the impact would be to our clients, both from maybe legislation that may force them to do something, or from simply wanting to make sure that the money goes to the right artists, or we'll cover it later, or really grassroots. How do I make sure that I actually am better off commercially by not actually streaming to fraudsters rather than streaming to fraudsters? So, it's really multi-layered, and we just felt it was just perfect. It just fit exactly in with us. Early days, but we're really, I think we're really in sync with Andrew and what we're trying to do.
Mm. I have a question. One of the things I'm thinking about a lot these days is sort of the value of music, and one thing is how artists operate in this industry, which I think is incredibly important, but also the infrastructure around them. Let's just say traditional labels, music publishers, whatever. If you look at those companies, the margins of those are also incredibly slim. Like this is a business that it's hard to create a good business, and to be honest. And if you're looking at, there is a potential of 10, I think Andrew you even said, north of that uh percent that's fraud that could over time be addressed. That can that can really contribute to a company's economy when it comes to margins and expenses and stuff. Oh, let me just talk a bit about the end goal before we go into the details. Andrew, if BeatDapp or other initiatives were able to eliminate fraud and allocate the rightful money to the rightful people, what would that do to the business at large on a macro environment, but also on like a company by company basis?
Yeah, I mean, macro level, the same amount of money is being paid out and the same amount of money is being made, typically. Um, Pragmatically, what happens is everyone in the industry who's actually in the industry makes more money. So
Mhm.
what no one wants to talk about is that the 80% of the fraud we catch is financially motivated fraudsters, organized crime, money launderers, terrorist organizations. These
Okay, well,
aren't these aren't like artists juicing their own numbers up. There might be some artists that try to move or manipulate some charts or algorithms to get into playlists or get charted or whatever. But when you remove those out, and then like, for example, there was an artist recently that we caught that had 47% of their streams the first month were fake. Um, Even when you remove out all of those fake streams, that artist still made 9% more money pro rata when we remove out all the other fraud. So my point is, if you're a real artist or you're really part of the music industry, you will make substantially more money with fraud removed than with it inserted. It seems counterintuitive, but if you're an artist and you're trying to juice your own streams, right? You actually, let's say you do 1 million streams for yourself. Well, you can't just have 1 million streams pointing to you. It's obvious. So then you need to have 20 million streams pointing to other artists. So it's like taking 1 step forward, 20 steps back from financially. So unless there's like another reason you're doing it, like chart or whatever, you actually lose money doing it this way. So it doesn't make any sense for you. Um, The reason everyone still makes money when you remove the fraud, though, is none of them are real artists. They don't have like a real user base that's actually listening to their music regardless. So it's not like you went from 9th in the chart to 1st or 40th to 20th. You literally were nobody at all, period. So you go from 100% to 0. And that's what we see a lot of. We see like millions of tracks that are uploaded that look like they're artists. They have fake artist names. They're attached to fake labels. They'll create entities in different countries and upload it through 15 or 20 different distributors. Last month, we had 50 distributors that had over 50% of all their streams were fraud in the DIY sector specifically. So what that tells you is that it's systemic and that fraudsters are not just picking one pathway. They don't want one point of failure. They're creating multiple pathways forward. So if one gets shut down, they can continue to operate. All of those people aren't real artists. All of those people aren't really part of the supply chain. They're not managers, agents, producers, songwriters, the actual artists themselves, the labels. They're just fraudsters. And when you remove them out, everyone makes more money. So maybe the net effect is same dollar comes in, same dollar goes out. But individually, to everyone that's actually in the music industry, you will make more money, period. And we see that now year over year with the market share. Now, we don't publicize exactly how market share is shifting, but we can see it shift. To give you an example, like last month, we saw a market share shift of over 21% on a platform. That means that every artist on that platform made 21% more money because we removed the fraud out. And I think that that's where this goes. You scale that across the industry. Real artists make more money for their creations. Everyone in the value chain makes more money. And I think it's a low-hanging fruit to just to sort of give everyone a quick win here. I mean, it's whack-a-mole, so it's constantly going to be a problem, but that's why we exist. Like we have, a massive team just working on this problem. And I would say that that's the fast win. Sorry, I'm rambling on, but it's a quick win. Like if you want to talk about how you just increase profit margins quickly, you remove fraud, everybody wins quickly. And it's obvious within 30 days.
And Jacob and Andrew, I think, one of the interesting things for me always is the motivation of people. And I think we have to do something that's right across the industry, and it's also getting this knowledge out right across the industry. And the biggest reason for that, for me, is that some businesses today are built upon vanity metrics. And that vanity metric is that the stream number is X. And if they attack fraud, their stream number is actually going to go south. And that includes everyone in the industry, right? That their stream numbers will go south. When they're looking at that next raise, depending on where they are as a company in their cycle, that's an important metric. And so I think we have to be understanding that as an industry, we really need to attack fraud for a whole bunch of great reasons, that it puts more puts more money in artists' pockets, but also takes money out of bad actors in the market. And then if we look at it in that way, then I think we can at least have that harder conversation about, okay, these went down, but the only reason they went down was because of we really got vigilant and attacked this fraud. And I do think it needs to be said, because sometimes we hide that part of it, but it's a key metric for businesses who are just starting to grow.
I have a question. One of the things that I have been thinking a lot about lately, I might be right, I might be wrong, but this is sort of a phrase I've been pondering about, and that is music sells anything but music. And it's not directly related to this talk, but the whole point behind it is that music in itself is undervalued. One thing is you directly affect that by the work you're doing, but you guys also moving into, blockchain, metaverse, Discord, so other environments where music is still music, but it's I wouldn't call it a byproduct, but it's an add-on to an existing thing.
I'd say it's a major feature of those existing things. Like Discord, when they were doing their last fundraise, I remember seeing the deck, and I think they touted that 70% of their users listen to music while they're on Discord. So I would argue that it's a feature or a major product feature for enabling them to be successful, period.
And that's amazing. And That's actually great to hear. The point I'm trying to get at is you guys are both technology companies. And, I think, Andrew, you said, was it 600 machine learning models? And one of the things I find really perplexing about the music industry is also sometimes it's um, relationship to technology as something relatively, let's call it simplified according to what other industries might be deploying in order to have a better experience, or in this case, fraud detection or streaming services. And do you believe that the reason why you guys are partnering, why you're seeing this probably for the first time really at scale, is because you both are leaning heavily into technology, also looking at other industries? What makes you the leading players in going into this field with extreme fraud detection?
Well, I think, um, look, I think Tune Global is I mean, he speak for himself, but I think Tune Global is the leader in like services for DSPs and making it easy if you want to deliver content to users, going to one stop and being able to do that at scale with uncompromised technology and having like a best in class experience. I think that we are the best at catching fraud, and we what made us successful was not I take a little bit of a different stance than maybe you do when it comes to like the industry basically not being tech friendly and not leaning into tech and being slow to adopt or whatever. I think a lot of the problem is people that come into the music industry aren't from the music industry. They come in from the tech perspective and they're told disrupt, 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 and they come in and try to disrupt and create something that no one wants to use. And I think they don't understand how songwriters function in a songwriting room. They don't understand that it's different when you walk in for country and you sign a split sheet than when you show up to a producing session with rap artists and there might be 7 or 8 people that come and go and like no one's signing split sheets till after. And that's just culturally how a lot of things are done. Do I wish it would be changed? For sure, but that's not how it works. And so I think what happens is people have this conception or misconception of what they think the music industry is. Then they go to build technology for an industry that doesn't operate that way. And then they're questioning, like, why doesn't the industry take tech? I think the industry takes plenty of tech. I'd seen them evolve a lot in the years I've been in. I just think that they do it better internally out, picking and choosing the products they think are going to help their own supply chain, their own mission, their own critical sort of mandatory targets and goals. And so I think by coming from the outside and trying to guess what those are, you sort of lose. The reason we were successful is because we built a product for a music label and accidentally found fraud. We were building an audit product, which required us to have a clean data source. And once we had the clean data source of all the times the songs were playing, we saw all these anomalies and said, we think you have fraud. At the time, everyone thought we were crazy. We went there and they were like, this is a rounding error. This can't be real. And then as we showed them one platform after another, it became so obvious you could not reject it. And so we had to be the best at catching fraud because you can't audit something and say, here's the in fact number of times this song's been played, 100 million, but actually these 20 don't count. And then have to like describe why those 20 don't count. You need to be able to prove why all those don't count. So we became the fraud detection specialist out of necessity because we stumbled into it and nobody had really been talking about or realized this problem was as systemic as it was. And once we were able to prove that, I saw the industry turn around very quickly and say, let's go. Because they all lose by this fraud occurring and then none of them want it to happen. So I would say the two things I would say is that we stumbled into a problem the industry actually needed to solve and solve quickly once they became aware of it. I would say also that we weren't outsiders trying to build something for an industry we knew nothing about. We were very much insiders who were very tech focused, who knew how to build something that was useful for the existing industry.
And I might just add to that, and I agree with everything Andrew said. From the customer point of view or our client that's actually trying to create something in music, you know, we're getting a lot of people every single day trying to do something. Some are ideas that they'll never find funding for, right? And others are ideas that have real validity, but they're different. And often these people are, like Andrew said, are not coming specifically from a deep understanding in music. I'm going to say it's almost impossible. I'm going to say we can probably count on our maybe hands and feet, and maybe a little bit more, how many people understand most parts of the music supply chain. right? Some of those things that Andrew just said, well, geez, that's not my world, right? In that piece. So these people come in to do something with music and build something big, maybe in UGC content, maybe in gaming, maybe in something else, that not always as a DSP. And they really don't know what they don't know. We're there to assist and help them through that process. And I think that's the critical part of this journey. And I'm going to say the music labels generally. I think certainly, the major music labels, and I guess Andrew might touch on how the fraud changes between different sorts of labels. But the major music labels, I would say, this is forefront in their mind, and I'm gonna expect that in the next few years, it I would absolutely expect to see something much meatier than it is right now in contracts for people who are getting licenses for music and what they're actually doing proactively for fraud. So this is actually something that's got to be top of mind for people in the future about what am I actually doing here? Because at some point, I'm actually going to be forced to do something. I have to learn this. I can't just put it under the carpet. And I think that's really important to, for people who are entrepreneurs listening to this and saying, I've got a great idea. Awesome, right? Just understand this will be part of your solution.
That's really interesting. I have a question that sort of is a bit away from what we're talking about. I'm just trying to really understand the implications of if we can, well, when we will solve fraud. We talk about catalog acquisitions, and you talk about the sort of dividends on the investments. I guess this is a pretty attractive thing that's going on right now because, some of these companies that have invested on behalf of other investors, either publicly listed or private, has sometimes struggled to pay out the amount of dividends they're supposed to or aim for. But if this is not solved over a few years, but addressed strongly over a few years, I think there's going to be some really attractive things happening in that space as well. Is that correctly assumed?
Yeah, I
Do you
think
think do you think there's also another question to that, though, that companies that were sold recently or in the past few years that might have been on evaluation depending on streams, I think there's harder conversations that have to happen at boardrooms as well within that process. So I do think it's a double-edged sword myself, right? I think there's tough conversations, but I fully agree with you that, if Andrew's able to lift revenue by 20%, that's 20% inflows to these other companies. Are ultimately part of that going to artists, but part of that going to the companies themselves.
if you play the
Andrew, sorry.
odds, if I was gonna say I think about the multiples a lot actually, because I think as an investor myself, I think about sort of you buy something at 8x and you get it and find out that 30% of the streams were manipulated. And the reason it would happen if you're a large artist is not actually malice on their part. If you're a fraudster, you need to look like you're normal. And how you look like you're normal is you bury your music amongst a bunch of normal looking artists. So there is a lot of artists that will have sort of different stream numbers than what they really should have. Now, when you remove all the fraud out, they still make more money, but the number itself is different because they're being juiced by all these other fraudsters. There's an interesting stat actually, which always alarms me. 99% of internet logins on websites are fake. Like on social media websites are bots. They're bot logins. Like if you look at all the social media sites, the actual traffic is low. It's almost all automated. And any security expert will confirm that and tell you the same thing. So it's interesting. What that tells you, though, is that there's just going to be inevitably a lot of this that happens. Now, when you remove it out, everyone's pro rata share increases. So even you remove the fraud, they still make more money. What I think about, though, currently is that if you buy a catalog for 8x and you find out that it had been manipulated more than others, maybe you accidentally bought it for 12x. So repaying that back over time might cost you more money. The other side is maybe you got lucky. Maybe you got a catalog for 6x that really should have been worth 9x. And now you're actually going to do super well. So I do think there's two sides of that. I think the real potential losers here are the distributors. Because if you're a distributor, if you're a DIY distributor specifically, you've probably made a lot of money off of fraud over the last couple of years. And when that market starts consolidating, You've probably raised money. You have your 100 employees. You think your X dollars big. And then they're going to come around and they're going to say, hey, you do $200 million in gross a year, of which you capture, let's say, let's lucky across the board, let's say 30 million, 15%. But actually 80% of that was fake. You have clawbacks now against you. You have these things that are considered like advances of future payment because you owe them back the fraud money they accidentally paid you. Like now your business might only be worth 50 grand, or sorry, let's say 50 million or 10 million, or you know, in that example with 200 million at 30, let's say a multiple of 5, but you're 80% off. So now you're talking about a $30 million acquisition when you thought maybe your company was going to be worth 300 million or 400 million. So it's pretty wild. Like what I think is going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years is that it'll shine a light on all the fraud. The distributors who make money from fraud are going to have a tough time if they don't get ahead of this now. They're going to have a tough time. Like they better start moving quickly to sort of get ahead of this, or I think they get bought for 10 cents on the dollar. And I think these private equity backed music conglomerates are going to go around and just buy this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. And they will be using a BeatDapp like service to come in and say, we need to analyze all of your stream numbers. And you said this company is worth 100 million. It's only worth 12. And we're paying 12. And I think that's going to be a tough situation for distributors who don't get on board quickly.
That's a pretty good sales pitch. Amazing.
I mean, it's you have a whole lot of nothing soon, you know?
It's a heavy conversation, isn't it? Right? Like, I've been having this conversation with people over the past probably, a few months. And I think most people are, the majority are in blissful ignorance, right? And then when you start to look at all those impacts, but ultimately, I think these are really, really good things for the industry because it does start to put money where money should be. And I do think,
and the
Jacob,
world.
yeah.
Like if you're a
Yeah, and the
distributor,
world,
like
yeah.
you accidentally paid $70 million to a terrorist organization who's blowing up kids in a train. Like the world wins from this. It's not like it's just music people. Like the world wins from this. And so I think because the people that are doing the crime are not musicians. We are not the same. They look like independent artists. They are not. They are not real artists. 80% of the fraud is fake artists from crime and organized crime, like scammers, professional scam organizations, terrorist groups. Like none of them should be getting our money, period. And I think that that's it's not just for the industry. I think it's good for the world. Like the amount of money you can look, I'll be bold here and say, I think you can wash easily $1 billion through the streaming services right now without anyone really noticing. Like $1 billion, I would bet, can go to illicit funds and go to these scamming organizations, and they can get it through. Because there's, 100 stores, various amounts of ceilings on each store. You can generate a certain amount of streams. You can have them coming from different countries. So again, it's just a really large unprotected pool of capital. And these aren't nice people that are doing this. These are some of the world's worst people. And I think that that's what we have to keep in mind here. Like nobody's out to catch the independent artist who is just trying to make a career as an artist. Like we want them to succeed. We go as far as telling the streaming services, these are collateral damage. Do not penalize these artists. These 3 are the problem. We'll see 4,000 artists in a scheme and say only these 2 need to be like targeted for any kind of implementation. Do not go after the other 3,998. Like those guys weren't the problem. Like we go that step because we don't want an individual artist who's a real artist being penalized for something they're not generating. But sorry, that there's a little bit of a soapbox, but I just want to point out that this is not just artists that benefit. It's the world that benefits, because like we don't want money going to these types of activities, period.
Yeah, I might have just been living under a rock for the last couple of months, and I have because I'm focusing on work quite heavily. But this is honestly like the first time I'm hearing these numbers, to be honest. 50% over 50 distributors are fake. 10% upwards might be fake. $1 billion might be, easily go through all this. What's the industry consensus on these numbers you guys are hinting at? is there's like broad consensus that most major players sees that this is true? Is this like initial findings? Where are we in this journey?
I might jump in here just
Go
because
for it.
Andrew probably can't talk about himself quite the same way. Certainly, when we're talking with the major labels, which we do often around just strategies, what are we doing, and things like that, they see BeatDapp as critical to the music industry and companies like BeatDapp, but BeatDapp specifically as well. So I do think there's a full awareness that this has to be out there. In some ways, and it's not necessarily connected to AI, although AI might be able to make fake artists easier, right? In there, I, I guess the music industry is trying very hard to get in front of that with a lot of restrictions on how their content can be used. This one's a lot harder to get in front of, and so you really need leaders like what Andrew's doing and his business is doing to make a difference here. So I do think certainly at the major label level, and significant distributors, there's absolute consensus that this is something that is going to have to be invested. I guess my question is, ultimately, where does that commercial responsibility lie? How does it lie? Is it split between different players because different players all benefit from less fraud in this process? But I think we're pretty early in that journey, and Andrew might have more insights into that part of the process.
No, I agree with you. I think everyone. It's one of the first times in an industry where someone doesn't have to lose for us to win. Like if you're in the industry, you are probably going to win by doing this correctly. Um, Even the distributors, like, look, you don't want to pay out the wrong partner. You don't want to suddenly get shut off stores because you're delivering like crap music that's all tied to fraud. And then suddenly your users are like, wait, I can't deliver to these 6 stores. Now I need to go somewhere else. So long term, everybody wins from cleaning this up. And so it's one of the only instances I've seen where this happens. Almost always, if you win something, somebody else is losing something. In this case, that somebody else losing something is not part of our industry. So good. Go back to like e-commerce fraud or whatever else you guys were doing along the lines. Like get out of this part. So I think, look, I have no illusions that we're going to stop all fraud. I just hope that they don't make it here and they sort of move on to something else. Uh, so yeah, I think the industry agrees. I think they see what we see. We aren't a black box. When we give results back to our customers, they aren't getting back a percentage that's vague. It's like, here's the exact fraud down to the stream level, how it rolls up to albums, artists, tracks. Here's our exact flags and why it was flagged, our confidence levels, why we've come to the conclusion, all of the evidence, a dashboard to investigate each one of the cases if you want to go deep. Like, we are providing you everything because we believe it's so hard to do this and do this at scale and do this consistently. You guys want to be the best at delivering content, making content, or creating the sort of experience for the fans. You don't want to be the best at fraud detection. Like that's what we're doing. And so from our viewpoint, there's no point in hiding the numbers or how we do what we do. We're very much not black boxed because we are of the understanding that there has to be someone like us doing this. It makes sense for one consolidated player to do it across the industry so the economics work for everybody, so that every distributor isn't spending $10 million chasing their own tail. Like spend a few $100,000, get the same level of protection, protect your business, stay ahead of the thing. If you're a large DSP, maybe it costs you millions of dollars, but at the end of the day, it's a heck of a lot better than trying to spend $20 million building it internally. So just same reason no one has on-prem servers anymore. Like you don't walk into someone's house and they have their own server stacks these days. It's like everyone just uses AWS or Google. Like it's just normal. Like you don't need to be the best at file storage to run an internet company. So it's same concept. We're just the fraud detection side. So I think the industry sees it. They've all seen the same numbers we've seen for years. I think what you're seeing now is more people's willingness to talk about it because a lot of people, especially the incumbents, feel comfortable with the defenses we've now built. And I think they're now willing to sort of have this conversation more publicly than they were maybe in the past.
Mhm. Con, Andrew was talking a bit about benefits and downsides of reacting early versus late. And now you, Con, and your customers through you are acting early. What are the upsides and downsides you might see from being, I'll call it first movers? Maybe you're not, but that's at least how it seems.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think first of all, the pressure for our customers comes from lots of different things. There's much legislation that exists around the world that um, government can close down businesses that are allowing funds to flow through terrorism and such. So if you're actually building a business that's also reliant on investors and confidence of investors and everything else, I think you have to be really diligent in the story that you're telling and the risks that you're removing through this process. So I think that's a benefit straight off. But there's a lot of other benefits. If you start to actually look at the algorithms that we work on, and at the end of the day, our major metric for most clients, not for all, but for most clients is total listening minutes per user, or total listening minutes and average listening minutes per user, right? So the more that you can get that up, hopefully that means they've got higher engagement, less churn, all those sort of things that are sort of crucial. When you start to pump that into algorithms, which is the usage that's occurred, your algorithms start going sideways because some of those algorithms are actually affected by fraud. And so it actually hits down to the root level of the user not getting what they want to actually hear because fraud's actually playing a role in this. Purely also then on a commercial model, often, our commercials with our clients are linked into a few things, features, but they're also linked into catalog size and a whole bunch of other things in there that we make available. Now, what we're doing with Andrew is being able to detect this fraud and then block this fraudulent content from ever coming back in. So that fraudulent content now is no longer part of that service. Their total track count might go down, but so does their actual costs and everything else that goes along with that, along with actually the streaming component of it. But I think those other bits, to me, are less important than how do you actually continue to engage your user. And everyone says it's a data game. Yeah, but garbage in, garbage out, right? We have to make sure that that data is really clean in that process. And I guess from our perspective with Andrew, we really want to make sure that certainly for our customers, it's almost a little bit like of a SaaS offering, if you like. So how do we make it as simple as possible? And this is true of everything that we do. You take some third-party metadata providers that are integrated into our systems. And those integrations in some cases have taken us up to 6 months to do. It's just unrealistic that clients are going to go out and do that or have the resources to do that. But they can come to us and say, hey, we want that service provider. No problem. There it is, turned on. How do we actually achieve that same result to that ease? Now, I do think, to be fair, we're early on in our journey, and I think we're going to continue to make that smoother and smoother over the next probably couple of years. And also, I think, depending on the data that we find back from the different types of services. So remember, for us, it could be a service that's on a gaming headset, right? Or a headset like AR, VR. It could be in medtech. It could be in background music. It could be in other areas that are not necessarily where you see, here's a DSP, right? And the top handful of DSPs around the world. So I do believe that there's going to be some learnings from that. There sort of has to be. But, I think us looping in with Andrew just to find that out and fine tune that's going to be the real critical component. But it's really about making it easy for clients just to say, yeah, I want that. And they literally, I'm going to say almost press the button, because it really depends what they're trying, what their actual user experience is, but we get as close to pressing the button as possible.
And for us, it's easier because we do an integration with them, and that allows every one of their customers to turn it on. So instead of doing that integration 100 times over, we only have to do the one, and sort of it works now for anyone who wants to carry us. So I think there's a huge value proposition for us in terms of just the resources required to build and execute this. And again, the faster we can sort of look in every dark corner of the industry, I think the faster these guys go back to PayPal or wherever else they came from. Yeah.
Andrew, you recently posted on your LinkedIn that I might be getting this wrong. You either were part of starting a VC firm or you joined one. And you guys are not investing directly in music as a part of your profile. That's something different. But as an investor with an experience with that, when you look at the music industry, how is this gonna affect investor sentiment towards music businesses? Not at all. Is it gonna be positive? Like, because a lot of the listeners on this podcast are entrepreneurs or innovators in this space, and they are pretty much all struggling with the concept of investing in music or music related technologies. And I think they're always looking for an edge up to sort of see how they can tell things a bit differently. Is this going to change anything on this perspective?
Um, you're right. I started a VC fund years ago, actually, around the same time I started BeatDapp. I just didn't tell anybody. I kept it quiet for 6 years. I didn't want people to. I think there's a power in meeting founders as a founder and not meeting them as an investor. So
Yeah.
I met them as a founder first, and then I would mentor them. And if I liked the company, I would invest. We have now invested as a fund into almost 200 companies, um, across different vehicles around the world. I think we have, as a portfolio, 8 billion in enterprise value now. So it's been like a pretty fun ride on that side. Um, I've gotten a lot better at picking companies. I definitely would say that I picked some losers early. But that also applies to knowing which companies of my own to invest my time into. So that's why I was so confident in BeatDapp, because I already had this lens of like what I would invest into and what I thought would be good and what wouldn't be good. Um, the problem in music is that from an investor standpoint, 75% of music companies are acquired for under 15 million. The only ones that are in the other 25% are consumer-facing applications or ones with broad appeal. So think like the Spotifys of the world, or SoundClouds, or streaming services, which Con works a lot of, or you know, potentially fan apps, because fans could be anywhere of any type of genre. Most of the stuff, though, gets acquired really early. And from most early stage venture, you're looking for a minimum of 50x return. Really, we target 100x plus. So when you look at that, I'm like, show me 10 companies in the music space that have exited for at least $1 billion. Because I rarely see a round for music under 10 million valuation cap. So I think partly it's wrong based on where the companies raise at. I think it's partly wrong based on how big they think they can be or the problem they're actually solving and who buys them. The reason I believe BeatDapp could sort of buck the trend was because it couldn't take any strategic money, so it would never be sold to a strategic. BeatDapp, if it gets sold, would be sold to a private equity firm or a large data security company. Like, we will never be sold. We do not take any money. We have no money from any musician, label, distributor, DSP, nothing. We've stayed as neutral as we can, so that when we say the number is the number, no one has a benefit, period. So that is very important to us. So that means our potential exit is much larger than if we tried to sell to an industry incumbent that only buys companies between 15 and 50 million. So that just inherently gives us another piece. The other thing is, by becoming the industry standard and solving this problem, we could potentially jump into other industries later. That doesn't necessarily mean that's where we need to be, but we have the potential to be scaled across other types of verticals like video games or whatever. So as a founder, what I thought about was, how do you buck the trend of that? And it's okay if you're not that. It's okay if you do admin. It's okay if you do something that's more B2B niche. That's fine too. But then what you should be targeting is angel investors, people who really love music and really love what you're working on and the problem you're solving. To me, they're investing because they really want to see that technology succeed, or they want to see they're happy with a cut, like, you just not dying and having some potential gains that are 3 to 4x and being there along a ride and learning all this cool stuff. Like, angel investors are great to have. I think there's this weird thing where founders like, oh, I want a venture fund. Like, I think angel investors can be amazing investors to have. And they often are operators, and they understand what you're going through. So I would say that my feedback has been, the music industry is tough because there's very few businesses that you could make an argument for legitimately that could be worth over $1 billion. I think that makes it already sort of a difficult place to be in, because when you're pitching a VC, it's not that you're the best music company. They're going, do I invest in this or the fintech company that has a $40 billion market size and already has $6 million in revenue, and they're competing with other fintech companies that have equal market, opportunity. It's just hard to compare the two of them together because the opportunity loss investing into music is greater than if you invest into something else. So that's the way that it works typically is I just think venture does not love music because of those dynamics. That doesn't mean that there aren't ones that make it. Look at Spotify, look at others. For sure it's possible, but it's just more the exception than the rule. And so as a startup founder, my advice to them is to focus on angel investors who really believe in your mission and what you're building, and get a bunch of people around you that are your champions. Don't go chase. I wouldn't even spend, if I was restarting today, I would never even talk to VCs. I know it sounds funny coming from me, but I wouldn't even have one VC call. I would meet angels only and run. If I'm building a music company, I'd just run my round with angels, and that would be it.
I think there too, Jacob, with what your question in terms of is it a positive or a negative, just going back to what Andrew says with angel investors who understand the industry deeper. I think without a doubt, you end up being able to use a company like Andrew for a fraction of what you'd have to do yourself. The reality is, I think that most angels would understand the different pressures that are coming across the industry. And so I do think that it's a positive, right, myself, because to be honest, you can just go use Andrew these days and you've solved the problem, right? Whereas it's much more difficult for an investor to hear a problem and not see a solution or see an open-ended money pit to solving that problem. So I personally think it's a positive. Certainly our sentiment from letting our own clients know what we're doing with Andrew, which we did a little bit ahead of the announcement, was extraordinarily positive, right? Just being able to access a service like that. And so that was really heartening to see them actually get it and understand it as well.
I'm laughing because it's exactly the reason I'd come to you if I was going to launch a music-related product. I wouldn't go try to put all the pieces together and be like, I'm going to rebuild everything that's already been built. Like, I'm going to put this thing together and go after my market. So it makes sense.
Totally.
Guys, it's been a pleasure, and it's so interesting to hear sort of what's happening, and I'm kind of shocked to some degree, and I think it's really interesting to see sort of how this deploys over time, both with your customers, Con, and how BeatDapp's going to be used in many other different scenarios. I think from a personal side, one of the things I'm always going to be in music, but one of the things I struggle with is the amount of problems in the music industry, and also I'll say, at least from an entrepreneur's perspective, the lack of perspective is sometimes perplexing. And I never doubt that I've done the right thing and I'll continue this path. But like, I also get encouraged by, there's a reason why entrepreneurs are in this space. There's a reason why innovators will absolutely are in this space, right? Music is music, and that is a beautiful thing. And I think having this approach to some of those issues is just incredibly important because, let's be honest, it's not the best space from a business standpoint. But this makes it a tiny bit better. And I think that actually does a whole lot. So thank you guys, and I thank you for being leaders and really taking the chance, Con, and on BeatDapp's technology, because that's an important step.
Thanks Jacob, and I do agree, but it is a heck of a lot more fun than banking.
Yeah.
Well, I think about that all the time. Every day that sucks less than showing up for your 9 to 5 and being yelled at by a boss.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every bad day is better than the best good day. So
for sure.
Awesome.
Perfect, guys. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Jacob.
Cheers.
Thanks, Andrew.